If Talen Horton-Tucker has a true breakout year, are the Los Angeles Lakers in danger of losing the second-year guard once his contract expires after the season? Today we'll dig into a rule that applies to THT and is one of the more complex topics in the collective bargaining agreement, the Gilbert-Arenas provision. The Golden State Warriors drafted Gilbert Arenas 31st in the 2001 NBA draft. It was pretty quickly clear that they had a steal in Arenas. But like the Lakers and THT, Talen Horton-Tucker, Arenas had only signed for 2 years. And when the time came to give Arenas a contract, even though he was a restricted free agent, Golden State did not have the means to keep him. The Warriors only had Gilbert's early bird rights, which is the same dilemma the Lakers will have with Horton-Tucker. So a quick primer on bird rights. After a player is under contract for a single season, they gain non-bird, which allows a team to give the player, in most cases, a raise of 120%. After 2 years under contract, the player has early bird rights, which allows for a raise of either 175% of their previous salary or the early bird number that the league gives out before the start of free agency. It's based on the previous year's average salary, and for the 2020-21 season, the current season, it's just over $10 million. So that's generally the vicinity it will be for Talen Horton-Tucker when his contract is up. Now, a team gains full bird rights after 3 years, and that opens up the door to a max salary. But back in 2003, when Arenas was a restricted free agent, the Warriors didn't have his full bird rights. They had early bird. And the Wizards, they had enough cap room to give Arenas a starting offer of $8.5 million for a total of $64 million over 6 years. The rules were different back then. But the most the Warriors, who were over the cap, could give to match that was a salary starting at $4.9 million. And so he signed an offer sheet with the Wizards. The Warriors were paralyzed. They could only watch the clock expire, and their excellent second-round pick was gone. So let's circle this back to the Lakers and Talen Horton-Tucker. What if the second-year guard has a breakout season and teams with cap room this next summer want to steal him away like the Wizards stole away Gilbert Arenas back in 2003? Is that a problem for the Lakers? But before I elaborate any further, let me share this. I get asked all the time, how did I become so knowledgeable about the NBA's collective bargaining agreement? And I got to say that my history goes back to the early 2000s when I met Larry Kuhn, who is the author of the CBA FAQ, which is really known as, the Bible or the Cliff Notes in this industry on the CBA. He breaks it down expertly. And what Larry's put together is something I want to share. It's called CBA Mastery with Larry Kuhn, and it's a video-on-demand teaching tool that will dig as deep as you're ever going to get into the collective bargaining agreement. If you are serious about getting into the business of basketball, be it as somebody with a team, with an agent, in the media, or maybe you're just a diehard fan and you really want to understand how the game works, this is the best program out there. If you are planning on taking CBA Mastery with Larry Kuhn, please use one of my codes. It helps support this channel. I'm going to put a link in the description. I can give you a 10% discount if you use the code PINCUS, P-I-N-C-U-S, or if you're using a payment plan, use the code PINCUSPP. It will also give you access to everything that went on through Sports Business Classroom, the most recent virtual conference that we had back in August, which was awesome. So if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments or reach out to me. That's CBA Mastery with Larry Kuhn. So let's circle this back to the Lakers and Talen Horton-Tucker. What if the second-year guard has a breakout season and teams with cap room this next summer want to steal him away like the Wizards stole away Gilbert Arenas back in 2003? Is that a problem for the Lakers? Spoiler alert, no, they do not have to worry. The NBA and the NBA Player Association agreed back in 2005 when they negotiated the next collective bargaining agreement that the rules were not fair. The Warriors had drafted really well and were not being rewarded for their front office's diligence. They did a great job. They got a great player in the second round, and now they were losing him because they didn't have the means to pay him. And that wasn't right. And everybody involved agreed enough that they added a provision into the collective bargaining agreement that we call the Arenas rule or the Arenas provision. It doesn't actually have a name like that. Gilbert Arenas is not mentioned in the document itself. But in this particular scenario where you have a player coming off of their first year or their second year, so they either have non-bird rights or early bird rights, like the Lakers and THT, there's a limit, an artificial limit, on what other teams can offer to that player. That limit is the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which for the 2021 season is $9.3 million. So for next year, it'll climb a little higher. Let's call it $9.5 million. And if you remember earlier, we had mentioned that the Lakers would be able to pay THT with his early bird rights at about $10 million. So matching a $9.5 million offer would be no problem. And that's how the Gilbert Arenas provision solves this problem that the Warriors had back in 2003. Now, if THT was coming off of his rookie season and the Lakers only had non-bird rights, the most that they'd be able to pay was their own mid-level exception of that $9.5 million. Next season, the Lakers don't project to have that much because they should be a tax team, but they have early bird, and since they can pay THT up to $10 million, that's not an issue. And this is generally why teams prefer to do at least 2-year deals with young prospects that they hope to develop. This way, when their contract comes up, at least it's Arenas rule. We're finding that teams are doing either cap room or even part of their mid-level exception to give a 3-year deal or even a 4-year deal to make sure that they have full bird rights so that they can avoid all of this nonsense altogether and not even have to worry about Arenas rule issues. But in the case of the Lakers, they chose, at the time, they could have given Talen Horton-Tucker a 3-year deal with cap room before or right around the time they got Anthony Davis. But they chose not to. And it's complex because the team may not have wanted to for a variety of reasons, but the player and their agent, specifically Rich Paul of Clutch Sports in this case, have to agree to a 3-year deal. And while teams like multi-year deals at the minimum, agents tend not to. They want to make sure that when their player develops, that they have a chance to earn as much as quickly as possible. And elaborating on the agent's perspective, there is an unfairness in the Arenas rule in that a player comes out in the second round, they kill it in their first year, kill it in their second year, or whatever. And now they can't earn quickly. I mean, they outperformed their draft class, and now they're not entitled to get as much money as they could possibly get. So there is a built-in unfairness to the Arenas rule, and they took that into account in 2005. In the first year, the player is limited to an amount at the mid-level exception, and in the second year, they can get a 5% bump on that. But in the third year, they can earn as much as if they had been paid the max from the get-go. So based on the numbers for Talen Horton-Tucker, projecting to 2021-22, he could get an offer up to $9.5 million in the first year, a 5% raise, so $10 million in the second, and then the third year would jump all the way up to $30.9 million in the third, which is outrageous, but we're going on the hypothetical that he just blows up. And then he can get a 4.5 raise on that almost $31 million, so 32.3 in that final year. So we're talking about a 4-year offer sheet of $82.8 million, which the Lakers would be able to match, and no other team can offer more. It's a compromise where there's a limit on what teams can pay, but they're also making it so that the player can get some of that massive money that they would have earned by killing it in those first 2 years. So for the team making the offer, so we're not talking about the Lakers, but the team trying to steal away Talen Horton-Tucker, they're making what amounts to a $20.7 million average contract. It's $82.8 million. And the league wants to make sure that not just any team with a mid-level exception, which is pretty common, most teams have that. They don't want any team with a mid-level to make that offer, to be able to make that offer. And so for the team making that offer, they need to have enough cap room for that average. So about $21 million in this case. And that's not most teams. That's only some of the teams. And the player would actually be paid that low amount, and then it would be jumped to the high and the high. over those 4 years. But that team would basically be hit on their salary cap for a flat $21 million. Whereas if the Lakers match that offer, they're going to have a normal, whatever the salary is going to be their cap hit. So it would be low, low, high, high. Now, at some point, the rule was amended in later CBAs so that a team could decide which one they want to do. The matching team, the Lakers in this case, do they want to average the salary or do they want to do low, low, high, high? And the challenge is you have to have the means to be able to do so, and the Lakers are projected to be a tax team next year, so they would not have the means to do the average of $21 million. So they would be hit with a low, low, high, high situation. So if a team needs $21 million to make this gigantic offer to Talen Horton-Tucker, which teams might have that kind of cap space in 2021? It's a little too early to say. We'll need to know, does Chris Paul opt in Phoenix? Does Blake Griffin opt in Detroit? Which we expect both will, but we don't know for sure. Some teams can make trades, but there are quite a few teams this summer who could make a run at THT. Teams with some cap room include Charlotte, Memphis, Phoenix, and Miami, but there are several teams that have a lot of cap space, or at least project to, including Chicago, Cleveland, Dallas, Detroit, New York, Oklahoma City, San Antonio, and Toronto. But a lot of that depends on whether or not they keep certain free agents and whatnot. And no, this isn't a Laker-only story. Once the Arenas rule was established, the Houston Rockets, made an offer to Jeremy Lin of the New York Knicks and Omer Asik of the Chicago Bulls that were Arenas offers, and neither team chose to keep them. And then Lin, so it is a Lakers story because Lin eventually did end up back with the Lakers via trade, but again, that's a totally different story for another video. And there are other players around the league who may be Arenas rule eligible when their time comes. So that's either this coming off season or the one after. One example is Daniel Oturu of the Los Angeles Clippers and Ignas Brazdeikis of the New York Knicks. Did I say that right? I probably did not. Also, most two-way players are Arenas rule because by nature, most two-way players are one or two rookies or one-year players, and they sign 1 or 2 year deals. Not all, but most of them. This isn't the first time the Lakers have been in this position. They had a similar case with Jordan Clarkson some time ago, and instead of letting him get to an offer sheet, they found a number that was a good compromise that paid him a healthy salary that he was comfortable with, that the Lakers were comfortable with. So he never got an offer sheet and never got to an Arenas offer, but it could have. And if it were up to, if I were to guess, I think the Lakers and Rich Paul and Clutch Sports and Talen Horton-Tucker work this out before it ever comes to that. But it's important to understand the rules, and that's why we're here, is to try to clarify and educate and share some of the information, because this is not easy stuff. I hope I helped make it a little bit easier to understand. Will THT prove to be a 3-time All-Star like Gilbert Arenas? He's talented. It's way, way, way too early to tell. But in the meantime, the Lakers are not at risk of losing him if they don't want to, if they want to keep him, because the hole in the CBA was closed, and the Lakers will not fall into the same trap that the Golden State Warriors did with Gilbert Arenas back in 2003. If you found this video educational and interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. This way you will be apprised of whenever I put out new content. If you have any follow-up questions, hit me in the comments. If you have the inclination, please donate via my Patreon or Venmo. Donations go right back into the channel and support this kind of content.